Now, the Global Cybersecurity Forum annual meeting is taking place in Riyadh, focused on strengthening cyber resilience and digital protection. In this former Foreign Secretary Shyam Saran is at the event, and he joins us live. He served as the Prime Minister's Special Envoy for Nuclear Affairs and Climate Change. He was also India's ambassador to Myanmar, Indonesia and Nepal during his years of service. Well, Mr. Saran, thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. Firstly, collective action in cyberspace is the theme at this year's Global Cybersecurity Forum meeting. But with growing geopolitical competition and conflicts raging around the world, what are some of the challenges that will be encouraging to cooperation in cyberspace? I'll repeat that question again. What are the challenges to encouraging cooperation in cyberspace, you think?
Well, the challenges are many because you are dealing with a technology which is advancing very rapidly. I think states and regulatory bodies are actually playing catch-up all the time. So it is a very, very complicated kind of a situation that we are up against. Also, as you mentioned, there is a very contested geopolitical environment. There is war taking place in Europe as well now in the Middle East. So it is impossible to, in fact, keep geopolitics away from dealing with this challenge. I think at the most what you can hope for is, are there some ways of managing this challenge? Can you put some guardrails in place so that the risks which are involved can be perhaps minimized? And that is the kind of discussions that we have been having here over the last 1.5 days. What are some of even modest steps that you can take in order to deal with this challenge?
Now, at the forum that you're attending, you've shared your thoughts on the future of cyber diplomacy, global cooperation and security at a panel discussion today, as we understand. Now, several world leaders have been trying to ease tensions and help broker peace in the Middle East, and Ukraine, India being one of them. And in your opinion, can India be a peacemaker? And if so, what challenges does it face?
Well, I'm not very sure whether we'll be successful in playing the role of a bridge maker, but I think we should certainly take note of the fact that in this very highly polarized kind of environment that I'm talking about, there are a few countries which have a certain degree of global influence, like India, which are able to speak to both sides. And I think that's a very valuable asset to have. Having a country which has a certain degree of, stature in the world to be able to speak to the, protagonists on both sides. So India is involved in that kind of an engagement. But, I'm not very sure whether or not, unless the protagonists themselves want to make progress in terms of bringing about peace, whether this is going to work. But in terms of, is this effort worthwhile? I think certainly it is.
Now, India has been under pressure to declare Hamas a terrorist organization after Israel declared the group behind the 26/11 Mumbai attack a terror group. Why hasn't New Delhi done this, and where does it stand on the war between Israel and Hamas?
I do not think that, putting labels are that important. I think what is very important is that the aspect of terrorism, which is affecting the entire world, is something that we must not only name, but try and see how we can deal with this challenge. And I think it is very clear that India, right from the time of the October 7 attacks, came out very clearly and said that this was a terrorist attack. So I do not think that the label is that important. I think India, along with several other countries in the world, particularly democracies in the world, is working very, very closely together with them in order to deal with this challenge.
Now, you mentioned countries being impacted by the war in Gaza. How has India been impacted? What does it stand to gain from helping to reduce tensions and end the fighting?
Well, India's interests in this region are self-evident, isn't it? I mean, we are very much dependent upon this region for our oil supplies, gas supplies. So it is very important for India's energy security. Do not forget that in this region, there are something like 9 to 10 million Indians who are living and working in many of the Gulf countries. Their welfare, their safety is a matter of great concern to India. So obviously, if there is going to be an escalation in this conflict, the welfare of these Indians is also going to be affected. So it is in our own interest that we would like to see peace to be re-established as quickly as possible.
Now, there's much conflict happening around not only in Ukraine and the Middle East, but also in other parts of the world. We're seeing a growing geopolitical divide. New factions and alliances are being formed with countries like US, leading to this change. Where does India stand in all of this?
Well, India will work according to what it sees as its own interests. Obviously, for example, we have a great interest in maritime security because our economic development is very much dependent upon our ability to access the world markets in ensuring the safety of the maritime sea routes. So our working together with different countries who have similar interests is something, again, that we have been following for a long time. In today's world, you do not have alliances being so important as coalitions of interest. So there may be some issues on which India's interests are much more closely aligned with one set of countries. There may be another issue on which its interests may be aligned with another set of countries. India, as you know, is a member of the Quad with the US, Japan, and Australia. But India is also a member of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization. It is a member of the BRICS organization, of BIMSTEC. So there are a number of associations of this kind, plurilateral organizations, where India finds that interests are best served by working in these different coalitions. So I think the age of looking at issues from the alliance perspective, that perhaps is getting a bit outdated.
Now, taking a look at an event which will be happening in a month's time, that's the US election. Who would India prefer to be the next president, do you think?
I think our own sense is that India-US relations, number one, enjoy a certain bipartisan consensus in the United States. So I don't think it will really make a big difference whether it is a Republican president or whether it is a Democratic president. Secondly, I think it is also very important to note that with respect to some very, very key issues of cooperation between the two countries, whether it has been a Republican administration, whether it has been a Democratic administration, there has been a certain continuity in terms of our cooperation, a constant trend of expansion in that cooperation. So I do not really see that that particular trend is going to be impacted. What may happen is that depending upon who becomes the president, for example, if there is a Trump presidency, I think the level of unpredictability, not only for India, but for other countries in the world, that unpredictably will increase. How Trump, for example, may handle issues relating to NATO or issues relating to relations with Russia or relations with China, all this will have a collateral impact on other countries as well, and India is no exception. So I think we have to wait and see how this develops. But even if there is the Trump presidency, from our previous experience with Trump, while there were certain tensions, there were some issues on which there were controversies, by and large, we were able to navigate that with a degree of success.
Now, speaking of the US, there's ongoing tensions between the US and China. Well, they appear to have drawn India and US closer. Why is that, do you think?
No, I think it is important to remember that, as I mentioned to you, there are certain issues on which India and the US have certain common perceptions. They have certain common interests, and certainly maritime security is one of them. And to the extent that we see China expanding its influence and presence in the Indian Ocean area, which is a very, very strategic space for India, wherever we can cooperate with other actors in terms of making sure that there is a certain balance which is maintained in this region, that the safety and security of sea lanes is taken care of. I think it would be very difficult for us to manage the emerging situation. Challenge for India is that, we are in a particular era where China is rising, but India is rising as well. Both are, emerging powers in Asia. So I don't think it is at all surprising that there are certain overlapping peripheries. There are points of possible contention between the two countries, and how we manage to try to ameliorate those kind of contestations, I think it is in our interest. Make no mistake, I mean, India is also engaged in a regular dialogue with China to make sure that there are no misperceptions, no misunderstandings. So even though we have had a major problem with China recently with regard to the border issue, the engagement between the two countries has continued. And we are engaged in a dialogue. Even with respect to the border issue, we have several rounds of discussion between our military personnel, between our diplomatic personnel. Some of the issues have been resolved, some remain to be resolved. But I think the good news is that both countries see it in their interest to continue their engagement.
So you would see a resolution in the near future on this border issue with China?
No, I'm not saying that we'll see a resolution of the border issue, not in terms of reaching a border settlement. That is perhaps something which will probably have to be dealt with in the future. But with respect to dealing with the current situation where there are tensions at various points at the border, I think we have managed to resolve some of those points of contention. There are some which remain, which are still the subject of negotiation. I think what is important is that both countries are committed to maintaining peace and tranquility on the border. They had been able to do that for nearly 40 years before the clashes took place a couple of years ago. But I think it is important to register that both countries are currently engaged in trying to make the situation manageable, reduce the element of contestation, and see whether there are issues of global significance, like climate change, for example, for multilateral trade, where the two countries have similar kind of interests, similar kind of perspectives. Can they work together on those?
Mr. Saran, thank you so much for sharing your insights. And we'll be speaking to Shyam Saran, India's former Foreign Secretary. Thank you.